Now we're going to have a discussion on the topic of is U.S. innovation and are U.S. innovation and dynamism in decline? And to do that, we've got Amy Liu, Vice President and Director of the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings, Evan Burfield, co-founder and CEO of 1776, one of the great dynamic incubators here in this town, James Pethokoukis, editor of AEIdeas and DeWitt Wallace Fellow of the American Enterprise Institute, and Representative Khanna, Democrat of California from the U.S. House of Representatives, under the stewardship of Sam Fleming, U.S. economics editor of the Financial Times. Please take the stage. Sam, good to see you.
Got everyone. Great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Fleming. I'm the economics editor of the FT. It's a fascinating topic that we're going to cover over the next 40 minutes or so. Is U.S. economic dynamism in decline? We really, in a sense, have two very contrasting themes about the U.S. economy right now. On one side, concerns about disruption and job losses through automation in industries really across the gamut, including indeed mine. Two, worries about declining dynamism, the number of startups falling radically since the 1970s, less churn in the jobs market, potentially less innovation going on than we might have hoped, and less migration and mobility around the United States. So we have a superb panel, as you'd expect, to talk about these topics. I'll start immediately on my right with James Pethokoukis. Then we have Evan Burfield on his right, Amy Liu, and finally Congressman Khanna on the far right. I'm going to start with James then. James, can you talk a little bit about, maybe just frame the issue that we have right now? Why are we talking about declining dynamism in the U.S.?
Right. Well, occasionally I will talk about this subject, and I will always get at least one person raising their hand saying, "Why are we talking about this subject?" And they say, "Listen, I can pick up a newspaper. I can look at the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times online. I look in the tech section. All I see is dynamism and innovation. I see Facebook." Snapchat, Google just doing fantastic. What are you talking about? In fact, I had someone say that to me. They were from Silicon Valley, longtime investment banker out there. They said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I've never seen so much dynamism and so ferment. And I'm sure that his experience was absolutely correct. But then you sort of look at perhaps the rest of the country. And if you actually look at the economic statistics, you see a lot happening in Silicon Valley, but overall, not so much. As you may have heard, the economy hasn't been growing particularly quickly since the Great Recession. And in particular, productivity growth, which is sort of the key driver of living standards, has not exactly flatlined, but it's almost a rounding error since the Great Recession, and that's often used as a sort of a proxy for innovation. So if you just look at that one number, you would assume, gee, we're not very innovative. We may be innovative in some sectors, but not overall. And then you begin to think why, and then you see number of startups, down by half over the past 35 years. And you look at the ability for companies not just start up, but grow quickly. That's down. More companies dying than being started. That used to never be the case. That's the case now. And then you just look at other sort of statistics of dynamism and churn and mobility, people not moving from state to state, people not moving from county to county. So when you look at the broader picture, it seems like this is not a dynamic society, and that lack of dynamism may be playing a role in the lack of innovation. And if we keep growing like this, instead of living standards, increasing at a rate which you can feel it. I mean, to me, that's really the does it seem like things are getting better? I can maybe point to a statistic, but if it doesn't seem like it's getting better to people generally, then it's not getting better fast enough.
We had a huge recession, obviously, in Atlantic recession in 2008, 9, 10. Right. Is this just a really long hangover from a horrible recession, or is it a bigger problem than that?
Yeah, I mean, often the simplest explanation is oftentimes the right answer, and I think that is part of it. That hangover has been a drag. But we had this big productivity boom from the mid-90s to 2000s. That actually began to tail off before the Great Recession. I think most economists expect productivity growth to jump up a bit, But no one's predicting going back to sort of the rates we saw when it was really just booming, like in the in the mid 90s, and then probably in the the 50s and 60s. And even if all the numbers are, and there's a lot of question about the numbers, and that's like a whole other debate. But no one can look at economic policy and think this is optimal for a fast-growing society, no matter what area. And I think particularly looking at the pace of startups and the lack of people just kind of moving around the country, it should be a red flag that something is wrong and something has changed in the United States.
I mean, Luke, let me jump to you. Part of the story we're going to be talking about is one of concentration, activity getting concentrated in smaller parts of the country. We're talking a little bit about dynamism and startups, but let's think about innovation particularly. Innovation in this country is highly, highly concentrated in a few areas that we all know. Has that always been the case? Is it becoming a more acute problem?
Sure. Well, first of all, I look at the economy from the bottom up. I don't think the U.S. is one monolithic economy. It is a network of different regional economies. And so whither go the United States and its innovation mojo is based on the innovative capacity of places as diverse as Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, the Bay Area, Boston, Austin, coal country, and West Virginia. And so when I think about the fact that we are still struggling with an economy that is not really benefiting all people or many places, right, is what's the role of innovation in that? And I think what we're seeing is, first and foremost, we definitely need, as a nation, to continue to innovate and be the producer of some of the best global solutions in the world. That's what's going to power the engines of growth in our economy, whether it's in clean energy, whether it's in advanced manufacturing, driverless vehicles, health diagnostics and medical breakthroughs. The U.S. needs to be the source of all those major breakthrough products and solutions in the country. And they do happen in these economic centers. And each economic center in the country specializes in different sets of this. And what's so interesting is in the last couple of years, what we would call the advanced industries of the country, the most R&D intensive, that sort of blend digital services and production, because there's no such thing as manufacturing anymore, pure manufacturing. It's the collision of technology and digital services and so forth with production that is really powering the economy. Advanced industries right now have grown faster in terms of employment, faster in terms of productivity and output in the last couple of years despite global headwinds. So the US actually still has really strong strength in innovation, and I'm sure we'll hear that from the congressman soon. The challenge is, as what we heard Sam say, is those advanced industries are increasingly less concentrated in, or becoming more concentrated only in a few hotspots in the United States. So back in 1980, there were 59 metropolitan areas that had a high density of advanced industry jobs. Today, only 23 metropolitan areas do. We looked at digital tech growth in the last couple of years. Only 10 metropolitan areas in the country captured 60% of tech job growth in the last 2 years. And what it means is the innovation hubs of the country are capturing a greater share of innovation in tech, Bay Area, Boston, Austin, while the lagging parts of the country continue to fall further and further behind. So I think the real challenge right now is how do we use innovation and technology to continue to power industries across the United States, across the landscape, while also bringing up workers in more of the labor force. And I think the other thing we should talk about in this panel is really the role of technology in jobs, because I do worry that not only is tech potentially dividing, creating have and have-nots between communities, but also maybe between workers and creating greater wage inequality too.
Well, Congressman Khanna, let me turn that question to you. I think that's a great one to bring you on. The divide is very, very present in your district between the tech haves and have-nots. Could you give us your perspective on how acute that divide is and why, in a sense, tech is not spreading its benefits more broadly?
Well, I agree with both panelists on the challenge of innovation being concentrated. I mean, Enrico Moretti, an economist at Berkeley, has shown that 300, these metropolitan areas that have concentrated tech industries have a multiplier effect and that's really leading to innovation. I will say, and then I'll answer your question, I'm very bullish on American innovation. Partly because we have panels like this. In the 1985, Samuelson had this whole article, we're going to lose out to the Soviets. And of course, we demolished them economically. And then once we won the Cold War, Harvard Business Review is at the decline of America and the economy. Germany, Japan are going to be the dominant Cold War economy, post-Cold War economies. And that turned out to be factually untrue. But it's partly our skepticism and our sense that we're always falling behind that I think fuels the competitive spirit and keeps us ahead. And when Europe or China have places like Apple and Google, Intel, Yahoo, Cisco, Twitter, then I'll start getting concerned. But it's not coincidental that a lot of that is in the United States. The challenge is how do we harness the talent of people across this country to participate? And people are doing very innovative things. The president of West Virginia, for example, is buying and acquiring colleges, community colleges and other colleges across the state to help bring them to tier 1 universities and expanding universities. And Tyler Cowen has talked about how university towns can spawn innovation. Hal Rogers, a Republican, calls Eastern Appalachia Silicon Holler and is talking about the transition from an industrial digital economy. So I think there are great examples of a transition. I'm very confident the country will succeed in that transition, but of course we've got to have the right policies.
Evan, maybe frame this internationally for us, because your incubator takes companies in from really across the world. Is Ro kind of right to be optimistic about where the US is vis-a-vis other countries which have large innovation centers, or do you see other countries catching up?
Yeah, I think we're very, very focused on two things. One is sort of how do you make sure that startups are able to tackle some of these more complex parts of the economy, right? We maybe don't need that many more subscription cat food services and dating apps, but we really do need our best innovators trying to figure out how we transform clinical workflows or agricultural food supply chains or transportation networks, right? These very complex challenges. Which are different. They are materially different than sort of putting something in an app store and scaling it up. And then the other thing we focus on is making sure anyone anywhere in the world can kind of have access to this. And I think that the biggest observation, we just kicked off our annual Challenge Cup program, and we'll go to 75 cities around the world this year. And what's so hard for people in the US to get their heads around is that they kind of accept that there's now startup activity in a Singapore or a London or a Berlin. But when you talk about the amazing fintech startups in Accra, Ghana, that is past the level of believability for most sort of inward-looking Americans. And we see that all over the place. It is astounding around the world now how many cities and how many countries have been very, very, very methodically studying this sort of innovation mix of talent networks, density, the roles of university, the right intellectual property to sort of create this ability to launch startups, to grow startups, to scale startups. And so you go to all these cities and all these places, they have accelerators now, they have incubators, they have angel networks, they have government-supported funds. You're starting to see later stage venture capital domestically emerging in these places. And so I think looking at it globally, I think that's tremendously encouraging in terms of more and more people tackling more and more problems. But I think it is something the US needs to stay very acutely aware of. To the congressman's point, we can't just sort of sit back and go, it's fine, we have Silicon Valley, so we're going to continue to lead the world in innovation for forever. I think you've seen the last 2 years, right? Global venture capital continues to go up, but you're also seeing the US percentage of venture capital declining as a percentage of total global VC.
And that VC story is important. Where's the VC coming from in these? Is it very much domestic to each individual market, or are you seeing US VC companies beginning to move overseas as well?
You're seeing increasingly. I think to take the extreme case or the obvious case, right? Your typical Chinese startup founder, they might decide they want to raise venture capital from a VC in the Valley because they might feel it has the right brand or the right network that it brings, but they're not restricted by if I can't raise venture capital from Silicon Valley, I'm hosed. There's a a massive and perhaps overheated domestic venture capital industry in China. You see the same thing in India. You're seeing the same thing emerging across Europe, certainly in Israel and Tel Aviv, and increasingly even in markets like Africa. You're seeing domestic wealth starting to look increasingly at how they actually provide venture capital into domestic talent.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Amy, go
can
ahead.
I just jump in and just say that I'm also an optimist, but I do think that sure and bridge these two conversations, it's really imperative for us to be intentional about how we take advantage of the technological changes underway. Tom Friedman just put out a book. He talked about this age being the age of accelerations. It's not like technology disruption is new, but it's happening at a pace that's faster than we've ever experienced. And it's happening so fast that it's happening faster than man's ability to adapt its policies, think about adjustment policy, or even industries to adapt. And so we're having enormous dislocation. We have people losing jobs, industries that can't keep pace, small, mid-sized firms that may be shuttering, maybe explaining some of the loss of dynamism we're starting to see. And so I still feel we're at the very beginning of this innovation age and era and the promise, and we have to be very intentional about how we help more industries, more small and mid-sized firms in more parts of the country begin to understand how to take advantage of these new technologies to create opportunity or productivity, or we're going to see more dislocation. So I think that's the intentionality in terms of policy that we're all going to be very conscientious of. So it lifts more boats.
But Jim, do you think the tech sector is doing enough on its own part to talk about this in a sense, this battle of ideas, like the anxiety that is out there about the impact of technology on people's jobs? Is there a role for tech here to actually get out there and say, we can bring benefits and here's how?
Right. No, I think certainly when I talk to people in the tech sector, whether Silicon Valley or elsewhere, I sense that they feel like they are not getting their message through. That there's this incredible amount of anxiety that, again, that the robots are going to take all the jobs, and we're going to result in a society where you'll have a very small sliver of the population who know how to work with computers and do these abstract thinking jobs, and they'll be fine. And everybody else is either going to be, a butler, do home health care, or those be at home with their VR goggles on and getting a basic income check. And to most people, that probably doesn't sound like a very good future. So I think, to some degree, tech people are trying to tell a different story, describe a future that seems attractive and realistic to people, other than sort of the scare future. And I think to agree that some of this anxiety is completely unwarranted. I mean, unemployment hasn't been high because of technology. I think that the argument is, there's this argument, are we in and that's what I referred to at the beginning. Is there stagnation? Do we have too much stagnation? No, wait. We have too much disruption. Well, which is it? Are the robots taking all the jobs, and we have these gales of creative destruction and technology accelerating? Oh, but wait, how come we're not very productive and innovation is low? So which is it? I think the answer that in some places there is acceleration and innovation and a lot of disruption. But in too many places, there aren't. And I think that's what you see in those overall numbers. Are we seeing massive amounts of disruption and accelerating technology in healthcare, in education? In a lot of sectors, we don't see it. So you have a thin edge of sectors and particular companies which seem to be super productive and are adopting the latest technology and they're innovating. Everybody else, not so much. I think we need, the problem with America right now, I don't think, is that there's not enough technological progress. We need to worry about how to deal with it. Well, we also just need more technological progress.
Congressman, when you speak to companies in your district, what do you tell them in terms of what they should be doing to ensure that they don't lose this battle of ideas and start to be seen as the enemy rather than the agent for higher prosperity around the country?
I don't know if anyone can tell them what to do, but I think we have conversations about what does it mean to invest in talent and harness talent across the country, right? There's no reason to think that a Steve Jobs is going to be born in Sunnyvale and go to Homestead, as opposed to be born in where I was born, in Pennsylvania or in Ohio. And I think there's a increasing awareness that they shouldn't be narrow in looking at where talent can be, and they need to be creative and think about where we can develop a workforce. And understanding that technology, while is displacing in certain ways is also liberating and transformational. You know, when I was down with Hal Rogers, he talks about how now people can actually stay in Appalachia. They don't have to leave, and they may have access to jobs because of technology. They may be able to sell things online. They may be able to work remotely because of connectivity. So there is a displacing effect, but there is also a positive effect, and we need to look at both and prepare for that transition.
Evan, what about, you've given us a little snapshot of the global situation. What about in the US? Is it the case that startups are tending to come from all the familiar places, or are you seeing startup activity more broadly spread, even if then companies tend to start to migrate when they're larger back to the more familiar cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like in the last year, everybody in Washington has sort of very much woken up to this question of economic dynamism and too much concentration in tech. I mean, I think there have been very concentrated efforts over the last 5-6 years. Certainly a lot of the work that Steve Case has been doing, the Kauffman Foundation, on this question of how do you create viable startup ecosystems in all these other places. And you now go to Madison, Wisconsin, you can go to Columbus, Ohio, you can go to these places, and you see local angel networks, you see startups being formed, you see that activity. I think the next challenge is the sense that they hit a wall, right? So yes, you can get your company started in Madison, Wisconsin, but it's very hard to raise a $10 million Series A in Madison, Wisconsin. And that is where you get this sort of self-reinforcing cycle where you have a lot of the big VCs in Silicon Valley kind of going, well, we don't really need to look outside Silicon Valley to invest because the best talent will have already come to Silicon Valley. And so you have sort of this assumption bias that if you haven't already come to Silicon Valley, you must not be the best talent. Therefore, we can just focus in on investing in Silicon Valley. And I think that's maybe not a bad investment strategy in a localized sense, but it's really, really not healthy for the country in the long term. I mean, I think a lot of these big challenges, right, this sense of too much concentration of venture capital, right? What is it, 85% of all venture capital flows into 3 states. That's not healthy for the long-term future of the country. This sense that clearly the tech industry, if we're gonna try to create a monolith, has huge issues internally of diversity that they also need to kind of grapple with and resolve. And again, there's sort of I think a fair amount of rhetoric paid to that, and yet you don't really see meaningful changes in those numbers around who's participating, who's involved, who's writing the checks, and it's an awful lot of white males continuing to invest in white males, and it's overly concentrated. I think, again, the sense of sectoral focus, are we too concentrated in areas that maybe not driving better solutions for everybody across the country? You know, these are all areas where the tech industry by itself can't necessarily solve it. It's got to be a broader network of civic leaders. It's got to be institutions, it's got to be political leaders, it's got to be tech leaders kind of coming together to figure out how you create the right dynamics.
Amy, your work involves an awful lot of actually drilling down into individual stories and individual cities around the country and trying to distinguish where policy is right and where policy isn't working well. It would be great to get an example from you of where you think, one part of the country where you think they are actually grasping some of the issues that we're talking about and beginning to harness some of the benefits of innovation in tech.
So just let me do one broad statement and then talk about some examples. You know, we look at the performance of 100 largest metropolitan areas in the country, and all 100 metropolitan areas experienced job growth in the last 5 years, but less than half actually experienced productivity growth, and only half experienced wage growth. And so when we think about innovation, we think about how do we use innovation to make our existing firms and industries more productive so that they can upgrade their positions and their jobs, pay higher wages, because the more productive they are, the more they're likely they're going to invest in their workers, either in workforce training, raise their wages, or potentially add another job. And most Americans live and work for small and mid-sized firms, not the big, large incumbent firms. And so I think the real promise right now is looking at the places around the country. They're trying to figure out how to take advantage of technology, which is truly ubiquitous, right? It's affecting every industry, even traditional industries, affecting every occupation, forcing upgrading of all those skills. So the places are being very deliberate about how do we prepare a future workforce that has both good soft skills and analytic capabilities, but also very digitally oriented, so that they can keep pace with the changing nature of the jobs being created inside firms and industries. And so we're starting to see a lot more industry partnerships with community colleges or K-12 systems to really focus on STEM or even STEAM, but also apprenticeships and more career-based learning opportunities, so young people are being exposed to the demands and rigors of the jobs today. But on the employer side, we also need to focus on what are the ingredients that can help small and mid-sized firms innovate. Some of it's the dynamism issue, which is about startups. But we also need to focus on scaling. And I think that we're seeing a lot of suppliers in a lot of these existing industries. I can hear the big incumbent firms talk about how their supply chains aren't as innovative. They haven't adopted the newest technologies, integrating it and streamlining costs or thinking about next products. So I feel like, so just as an example, I think of Louisville, Kentucky as a place that is thinking about all of these things. They have a big incumbent firm called GE Appliances. This is a manufacturing firm that's upgrading everything it's trying to do, but when it reshored back to the United States, its occupation mix completely changed when they brought the jobs back to the United States. They couldn't find the workers. Rather than complain about it, they decided to partner with the K-12 system, Westside Louisville, and community college to create a certificate program that's now providing jobs not only for GE, but for the entire manufacturing supply chain. The other thing they're doing is they decided to open up their innovation problems to the local entrepreneurship community. They weren't a black box. So it's not just GM working with Google behind some campus in Dearborn, or Ford. They decided, we see the future of home appliances. We see the millennials all demanding smaller apartments. We're seeing the world wanting smaller apartments for affordability. We need to make micro appliances. How do we work with the entrepreneurship community to come up with the next generation of home appliances that are meeting the demands of the future home place? And so they created an innovation lab where the engineers within the company are working with the startups in the local community and around the world to help GE kind of come up with this next generation set of products. I think the real innovative places are where incumbents work with small, mid-sized firms, participating in an innovation ecosystem, investing in the workforce skills, and just creating sort of an innovation culture that really extends to more parts of the community.
Jim, we're talking a lot of it has to be initiatives from local areas and indeed businesses themselves, but we're in Washington. Do you see policy ideas in a sense coming top down from Washington DC which might help address this, or do you think the debate here on the Hill in the White House is not going in the right direction to actually address some of the issues we're talking about?
I didn't hear this issue talked about during the presidential campaign. I didn't hear the words productivity, innovation, dynamism. I didn't hear any of that. When I look at the debate today, I still am not hearing that talked about, whether it's a tax reform or health care, or even regular. There's been a lot of talk about regulatory reform, and the regulatory reform is focused a lot on banking and energy. I've heard nothing about in what ways do federal regulations hurt innovation, prevent small companies from getting bigger and competing with big companies. At the end of the Obama administration, the Obama Council of Economic Advisors did a lot of work on this, looking at things which a lot of politicians don't normally talk about. Everything from sort of labor market deregulation, like non-compete agreements, which prevent people from going from one company to the next, or housing policies, which make it expensive to move to these high productivity cities. Those kinds of issues were only barely being addressed in the last administration. I don't see them being addressed all. And if I was going to think of one macro issue, and I was thinking a little bit about this as we were talking about, creating these accelerators and, incumbents, working with local businesses and all that. There's a great, Elon Musk has many great quotes. And one of his quotes is that, all of America's problems, he goes, still, if you want to do something great with your life, there's no better place to try and do it than the United States of America. And I think if people no longer believe that to be true, and they don't think, gee, if I really want to do something fantastic, and I have fantastic ideas, I want to come to America. If they don't think that's true, that I think we have lost a critical competitive advantage over the rest of the world. So I think, and many things go into that, including immigration law, but other things as well. So I think that is maybe the deep magic of the American economy, and I hate to lose that.
Congressman, well, from where you sit, what do you think really would be your top priorities right now to start addressing some of the issues we're talking about here?
Well, let me start with an anecdote, because I was just back at my district at Google, and I agree with your point about diversity, but they were taking this concrete initiative. They had a partnership with Howard University. The Howard University president was out there. They had 26 Howard students and 31 faculty from the HBCUs from across the country. And here's what struck me. I mean, all these young kids, obviously they didn't care about any of us politicians, but they were mobbing Sundar Pichai, who was the CEO there, to get a picture with him. I was like, Sundar's like a nerd. I've known the guy for 15 years. And he was this rock star. And you think, and I had the same thing when I was down in Appalachia. There, because I'm of Indian origin, I think they just thought, okay, here's this guy, he must know about tech. And these coal miners' kids were, all excited. There's a fascination across this country with technology innovation. The challenge is, how do we give folks the opportunity, the investment to participate in it? Because I don't think it's a lack of interest or a lack of will. We do have fundamental advantages in this country. For example, I mean, my heart goes out, of course, to the terrorist attacks in Britain, and condolences to the Prime Minister. But some of her comments, they don't have a First Amendment. We have a First Amendment in this country. That really helps innovation when we don't put liability on free expression. One of my colleagues went to China, and again, a great economy, but he was lecturing a number of Chinese PhDs. And they could not believe that Silicon Valley entrepreneurs didn't have to have a PhD. They just couldn't get this idea that there were a lot of college dropouts. The PhD in Silicon Valley required is failure. That's your PhD. And the immigration, the diversity. So I think there is such a unique quality to our political enterprise, even for all the problems, our diversity, our capacity for risk, that's very hard to replicate, and that fundamentally make me very confident about the long run.
Are there any particular policy initiatives right now that you think
I would say one of the things that, I've said this, I mean, the president, one thing he could do, which would be totally bipartisan, he spent 10 years or something on The Apprentice. Like, if he comes out and says, I want to create these apprenticeship programs across the country in technology, I guarantee you Democrats would vote for that. He could talk about, readjusting labor markets. The panelists have made a good point. Look, tech has to adjust, because I agree with your point about there being a bias to investing just in Silicon Valley and a laziness of doing that. But if they're willing to say, look, we're willing to take a bet and hire people in other parts of the country, and let the government also help out in creating some of these apprenticeship programs and rewiring labor markets to adjust for technology, the change, I mean, that would be a very concrete policy he could undertake. I think that having the right set of wanting to still have the best and brightest from around the world innovators come to the United States is going to give us a comparative advantage. I mean, when you look at their economic growth from 1950 to today, the single biggest factor is women entering the workforce. I mean, this is not controversial. It's conservative economists, liberal economists, and we no longer have as much of a gain. So we need immigration to continue to be economically competitive. So I think that I think politicians, I guess my view is politicians could mess it up. We have such a good, strong democratic system, but we're succeeding in spite of gridlock, and I agree with Jim's point that there wasn't any conversation about it, but it doesn't take much.
Evan, from your point of view then, what do you think, well, maybe focus on regulation. That's one area where clearly companies are always complaining. Are there any particular areas where you think there's easy, low-hanging fruit or whatever, which could be plucked to make?
Look, I think if you link a couple of these themes together, we still, coming back to sort of the reference you made earlier to sort of the tech community or the tech economy, I mean, technology has eaten the whole rest of the economy. It is the economy now. And what you're seeing is the tech community by itself can't solve the diversity issues. It needs to work with the Howard University. You need to be bringing these broader networks together to figure out how you actually address this. You're not going to rebuild the economy of Louisville to be a dynamic place unless you're getting a GE, a great mayor, the right local community leaders coming together to create the right ecosystem, wealth in that community coming off the sidelines to start investing. And in a lot of these different ways, right, you need these new networks to be formed because the sort of, again, idea of tech as its own isolated thing that's going to solve itself. In the same way, right, we've come through like 15 or 20 years where a tremendous amount of venture capital, a tremendous amount of innovation was focused on all the problems that weren't all that regulated, right? We totally disrupted media, we've changed retail, we've made massive transformations in entertainment, and that makes sense. Those are comparatively easier problems. But we also tend to regulate the things that are most important to us in society. There's a reason we regulate where our food comes from or how our healthcare gets delivered. And as you're starting to see more of the kind of fundamental technologies smashing into these more complex regulated sectors, it's requiring the tech industry to learn a set of skill sets and build a set of networks they might not otherwise have had. But it's also requiring policymakers, I think, to come at this differently and understand new ways they can activate. And so I get most excited when I look at things right now. Frankly, Washington's a relatively depressing place to be right now, but I get incredibly inspired by a lot of the mayors across the country who are looking at this and I've been really playing out this concept that I think some of the smartest mayors right now really get that part of how they're going to compete for jobs and talent right now is actually regulatory arbitrage. So if you look at a Pittsburgh going, we want to be an unbelievably easy place to test out self-driving cars, and that's part of how we're going to help reinforce a natural advantage we have with Carnegie Mellon. You know, that's, I think, a lot of the strategies that you're going to see mayors see, which is how do we pick something we can be in, how do we become an incredibly easy place to come and innovate, and then use that advantage to kind of continue to build our talent base and attract more capital.
We have to wrap it up shortly. Last two thoughts to Jim and then Amy. Could you pick up the same theme? Is there one particular piece of low-hanging fruit that either could be on Washington level or in a particular that you've seen on a particular in a particular city, which you think, yes, that's exactly the kind of policy initiative that you need to be doing to resolve this dynamism problem?
I'm going to give you an amazingly bureaucratic answer, which is, you know, we have this Office of Management and Budget, we have offices of the Congressional Budget Office, we try to score all these plans, how they're going to, you know, and there's this modeling. I would like to see all federal regulations scored for how does it affect competitiveness and how does it affect the competitive balance between incumbents and new companies. And I would like sort of an innovation score for new regulation. Now that's a great Washington answer, which maybe all the Silicon Valley people who come to Washington hate hearing about. But I think that would at least begin to focus people's minds on what at least here on the federal level, what we're doing affects things happening out there.
Amy.
Well, I as a program that focuses on cities, I think that all the progress is going to happen out there. I think that innovation and all the advances in our economy are going to have to be unleashed outside of Washington. And I also I appreciate your comments about mayors. I feel like at this point, mayors and cities are shouldering the burden of so many of our nation's greatest promises, whether it's climate change, whether it's around security, thinking of the mayor of London, economy, productivity, wages, bringing up youth employment. All of these aspirations of the country are now being put on the shoulders of mayors and all their public-private philanthropic partners. And so when I hear about a Trump budget that says we're going to continue to push all these costs down, all I keep thinking about is how do we co-invest? Because these are what the cities are experiencing right now are national priorities. And how do we not be antagonistic, but partner with them so that we unleash bottom-up solutions, bottom-up innovation? So I'd say continue to unleash R&D, encourage industry, university, sector partnerships, continue to encourage community colleges and the workforce system to work with industry around apprenticeships and STEM education, and continue to, yes, Washington doesn't know best, but that doesn't mean sending strong signals about how we can encourage that kind of bottom-up problem solving we need as we've been discussing today.
Great. Well, we started on a downbeat note, I think, with declining innovation and dynamism. We've ended up on a positive note with some good ideas on what we can do about it. Please join me in thanking our panel.